Tao had once been unstoppable. His name alone carried weight among the other prides, a name whispered with caution, a leader marked by strength, sharp instincts, and an iron will. Every scar on his body told a story of battles won, territory defended, and a pride that flourished under his rule. Tao didn't need to roar to command respect. It was in his walk, in the way his eyes held steady no matter who dared to challenge him. But strength fades even in the strongest. The fight that ended it all wasn't supposed to be his last. When the rogue males crossed into his territory, Tao did what he had always done. He stood his ground. He fought without hesitation, a fury of muscle and memory, fueled by duty more than rage. For a while, it seemed he might win again, that experience could beat youthful hunger. But age clung to him like an invisible chain. His reflexes dulled. His body, once carved by years of dominance, betrayed him with the smallest hesitations. He took the blows. He answered them harder. But it wasn't enough. And then the poison hit, a burning jab between his ribs where no claw had touched. He staggered, confusion flickering through him. This was no lion's fight. This was something darker, a human weapon, a betrayal he couldn't understand. By the time the last challenger limped away, Tao stood victorious over the battlefield, but it was a hollow victory. His muscles trembled, his vision blurred. No proud heads greeted him, no lionesses came running to flank their king. His pride was gone, scattered by fear and the scent of weakness. He tried to call them. His voice, once deep and commanding, cracked and fell short. Silence answered him, no echoes, no loyal return. Tao was alone. Blood crusted across his side, matting his once proud mane. Each step forward tore new agony through his limbs. His breath rasped in his throat, ragged and uneven. Every instinct told him to stay down, to let the earth take him. Yet something deeper stirred, something older than pain. Move. He dragged himself forward. There was no destination he could name, no plan, only the need to keep going, to fight against the silence closing in on all sides, to survive, not for territory, not for pride, but simply because surrender was a language Tao had never learned. The king had fallen, but he was not ready to be forgotten. Each step was a war. Tao's body, once carved from strength and dominance, now moved only through sheer stubbornness. His wounded side pulsed with a sick heat, his legs buckling beneath him more often than they held. Pride had once lifted his head high, but now even keeping it above his shoulders felt like lifting a boulder tied to his bones. The world around him blurred into irrelevance. There were no familiar scents, no reassuring signs of his pride's presence. Only the taste of blood in his mouth and the growing certainty that he was truly, absolutely alone. Every muscle screamed for rest, but rest meant death, and something in Tao's battered spirit refused to surrender to it. He dragged himself forward, pulling his weight inch by inch, often falling onto his side and lying still for long, agonizing moments before mustering the strength to rise again. His paws, once heavy with purpose, now scraped raw against the ground with every desperate push. Each movement left behind a silent, invisible trail of determination, the last flickering embers of a life refusing to be extinguished. The old rhythms of survival played faintly in his mind. Walk, hunt, protect. But they were broken rhythms now, fractured by pain and exhaustion. Hunger gnawed at his insides, twisting the remnants of his strength into tight knots. His once mighty roar was nothing more than a hoarse grunt, barely enough to chase off the scavengers that had begun to stalk the edges of his existence, waiting for him to collapse. But Tao did not collapse. Not yet. He thought of the cubs he had once defended, of the lionesses that had relied on him to stand unbroken. Those memories floated just beyond reach. Not sharp enough to comfort him, but strong enough to shame him from giving in. He was not crawling toward any known destination. There was no pride to return to, no throne waiting for him to reclaim. He crawled because something deep inside him demanded it. A voice without words, urging him to keep moving forward no matter how meaningless it seemed. Every fall scraped more skin from his battered body. Every time he rose again, it cost him something invisible, something he knew he would never fully get back. Strength that would not return. Dignity that could not be restored. Still, Tao crawled. There was no thought of triumph, no fantasies of recovery, only the brutal simplicity of one more step, and another after that. He was a king without a crown, a warrior stripped of his armor, clinging to the only thing he had left, the raw, aching, stubborn will to survive. And somewhere, far off beyond the pain and blood and silence, something inside him still believed that not all battles were meant to be lost. Tao's body betrayed him with every movement, but his instincts, dulled though they were, still flared when danger lurked near. As he dragged himself onward, there were moments, subtle, sickening moments, where survival demanded something more than endurance. It demanded awareness. He had crossed into territory that felt wrong. Even through the haze of pain, he sensed it. A stillness that didn't belong to any predator he had known. His wounds, already pulsing and hot, began to burn worse, sharper, as if something in the air itself sought to finish what the rogues and poison had started. Then came the traps. Tao didn't see the first one until he was almost upon it. A patch of meat lying out in the open, glistening with an unnatural shine. Instinct shrieked at him to turn away, but his body screamed louder for food, for anything to ease the growing emptiness inside. It was only at the last moment that the memory surfaced. Meat left lying in such an obvious way was never a gift. It was a trick, a death sentence disguised as mercy. His head jerked up, muscles locking. A faint scent clung to the offering. Chemicals, wrongness, poisoned bait. It wasn't the first he would pass. As he continued to crawl forward, more signs of human tampering appeared. Things that no lion, no animal should have to learn to fear. Snares half buried in the dirt, waiting for a weakened paw to stumble into them. Sharp, thin wires stretched low across game trails, invisible unless you were looking for them. Every few feet, another reminder that the wild no longer belonged to those who had shaped it through blood and survival. It wasn't only rival lions who had wounded him. Tao's collapse hadn't been a random act of fate. Somewhere during the chaos of battle, a human had intervened, not to end him quickly, but to weaken him, to make him easy prey. The poison in his bloodstream wasn't the accident of a misfired dart. It was deliberate, calculated. He had been marked, not for the natural order of life and death that every lion accepts from the moment he first roars into the world. Number Tao had been marked for something else, for profit. The idea slithered through his mind, foreign and unbearable. He had been reduced, not by tooth or claw, but by invisible hands far removed from honor. Humans who saw him not as a king, not even as a creature worth respecting, but as merchandise. A pelt, a trophy, a prize to be hunted, wounded, broken, and sold. He realized now that his collapse wasn't his alone. It was part of a larger rot, a betrayal of the wild itself. These traps weren't for survival. They weren't set by desperate villagers protecting livestock. They were part of a network, organized and ruthless, creeping deeper into lands where lions once roamed without fear. Every strained crawl Tao made carried him deeper into this invisible war. A war he had never agreed to fight. No roar could scare away the corruption that seeped into the earth now. And yet, even knowing this, even understanding on some primal level that the odds were stacked against him, Tao didn't stop. Every poisoned trap avoided, every painful drag of his body forward was a refusal to die on their terms. He would not collapse over a poisoned bait. He would not let his story end in a snare hidden by human hands. He wasn't crawling toward salvation. He was crawling toward dignity, one brutal inch at a time. Because even kings, when they fall, deserve the right to fall fighting, not as prey, not as product, but as living proof that some spirits cannot be bought, broken, or sold. And Tao's spirit, though battered and bloodied, was not done yet. Tao's world had shrunk down to two things: the pain burning through his body and the faint, stubborn will refusing to let him give up. Every movement demanded more from him than the last. Muscles, once used to chasing, fighting, and defending, now spasmed uncontrollably beneath his skin. His lungs rattled with each breath, a broken engine threatening to fail with every pull of air. There were moments, longer now, harder to fight through, where his body simply refused to move. He would collapse onto his side, too weak even to lift his head, and lie there, caught between instinct and surrender. Each time, darkness tugged at him with soft, insistent fingers. It would be easy, so easy to let go, to close his eyes and let the endless ache dissolve into nothingness. But something deeper than instinct pulled him back each time. Some ember inside him, tiny and infuriatingly persistent, flared just enough to push him up again. Drag, stagger, fall, repeat. The crawl no longer resembled movement so much as a slow, torturous bleeding of life onto the ground beneath him. His paws, once fierce weapons, now left behind smears of blood with every painful push. His mouth hung open, tongue dry and swollen, as thirst gnawed through him worse than hunger. His ears, alert even in his exhaustion, picked up faint sounds now and then. Echoes of life he could no longer reach. Herds moving far beyond his path, predators trailing at a distance, vultures tracing lazy circles above him, waiting. They could wait. He wasn't finished yet. The memories came unbidden during his slow-motion collapse. Sharp flashes of a life that seemed to belong to another lion. The soft weight of his cubs climbing over him, tugging at his mane. The lionesses stretching under the shade after a successful hunt, purring as they cleaned their paws. Victories he had roared into the open air, daring anyone to take from him what he had built. All gone now. All left behind in a world that had no place for the broken and the beaten. Tao barely recognized himself anymore. His mane hung in ragged clumps, stiff with blood and dirt. His ribs jutted against his skin with every shallow breath. His legs, once pillars of strength, folded beneath him without warning. Even the ground beneath his paws felt alien, rejecting him with every agonizing inch. He no longer fought to reclaim his place. That place was gone. Now he fought only for the chance to leave behind a truth that couldn't be erased, that he had not been taken easily, that he had not bowed to the traps laid for him, that, even crawling, even bleeding, even dying, he had chosen to move forward. The line between living and dying blurred dangerously thin. At times he lost track of whether he was still breathing or just imagining the effort. Time twisted itself into a cruel loop: stand, fall, forget, stand again. His senses betrayed him. Sounds came muffled and distorted, and colors dimmed into gray. When he finally collapsed again, he lay longer than before, motionless except for the slow rise and fall of his battered chest. He didn't rise this time. His body had nothing left to give. In some dim corner of his fading awareness, Tao understood this was how most kings met their end, not with roars or glory, but with silence. Forgotten by the very world they had once ruled, their battles meaningless against the endless march of time and teeth. He could feel the predators gathering again, cautious, respectful. They would wait, as they always had, for the last shudder of breath to leave him, Nature demanded no pity, only patience. Still, in the broken machine of his body, that ember refused to die. He lifted his head, barely, and with the last strands of strength binding his bones together, pulled himself a few precious feet further toward a scent he could hardly recognize. It was not the smell of blood or death. It was something sharper, metallic, faint, something human. Tao did not know what waited for him at the end of this last desperate crawl. He knew only that he had not come this far to die halfway. Even stripped of his crown, his pride, and nearly every ounce of his power, he still had something no trap, no wound, no enemy could take from him: the will to fight for one more breath, one more chance, one final stand, even if no one remembered it afterward. And so the fallen king crawled on, toward something he couldn't name, toward a fate that had not yet decided whether to save him or to end him. Tao no longer moved with purpose. His crawl had become a slow surrender to gravity, each push of his body weaker than the last. His vision blurred into a haze, and sounds faded into an indistinct hum around him. He barely registered the faint scent that grew stronger with each dragging step, the strange, metallic, oily scent of humans. It wasn't fear that slowed him now. It was the dim, flickering hope buried so deep inside him that even he didn't know if it still existed. Hope was a dangerous thing for lions. It was not something they were born to trust. Yet Tao, with the last threads of his existence pulling him forward, let it lead him. He collapsed just outside the perimeter of the camp, a battered heap of muscle and memory. He did not see the two figures who first noticed him, only the shift in the tension of the air around him. Faint voices rose, alarmed and unsure. Footsteps approached cautiously, hesitating only steps away from where he lay. Elena gripped the edge of the battered outpost table with white knuckles, her breath caught between disbelief and horror. Musa stood frozen beside her, his hand halfway to the old tranquilizer kit neither of them had needed until today. Tao was not some thin, desperate lion scavenging the edges of human life. He was massive, a king broken and bleeding at their doorstep. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Protocols flooded Elena's mind, rules drilled into her since her first day. Do not approach wounded predators. Do not engage without backup. Observe and report only. And yet, staring at the shredded body lying before her, those rules felt empty. A creature that powerful, that proud, did not crawl miles to die in silence at the edge of strangers' boots. He had come here for something, whether he understood it or not. Musa broke the silence first, his voice low, almost reverent. If we leave him, he won't make it. The official handbook would have told them to radio for backup, to wait for the proper authorities. Backup that could take hours. Hours Tao didn't have. His breaths were shallow and ragged, each one a losing battle. Elena made the decision before she realized she had. She grabbed the emergency kit, her hands trembling, and crossed the distance toward Tao slowly, speaking softly under her breath. Not to him, but to herself. Words to steady the fear climbing her spine. She knew full well that one wrong move could trigger the lion's last survival instinct, turning hope into tragedy in a single heartbeat. Tao did not rise. He did not growl. His body shifted slightly, but his eyes remained half-closed, the fight drained from them. He had not come here to wage war. He had come here to surrender himself to something he no longer understood. Elena crouched just out of reach, assessing the damage. Deep gashes, exposed ribs, a wound leaking infection, all layered over an exhaustion so profound it seemed like death itself waited just beneath his skin. She eased a shallow pan of water toward him, pushing it slowly with a stick. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't respond. Then, in a movement so slow it was barely there, Tao shifted his head and lapped once, twice from the pan. It was not a victory, not yet, but it was something. Musa, emboldened, moved closer, setting up makeshift barriers to give them time and space in case Tao panicked. The old radio sputtered static into the dusty air as they called for emergency veterinary backup, their words clipped and urgent. Help was on the way, but time moved differently here, stretching and snapping under the weight of Tao's weakening body. They could not wait hours. It became a silent agreement between the three of them. The dying lion and the two humans too stubborn to leave him. They would stay. They would fight whatever fear or rulebook said otherwise. Tao had come this far. He deserved more than an empty death at the edge of a forgotten camp. Elena didn't know if they could save him. She didn't even know if Tao wanted to be saved. But sitting there, her knees pressed into the cracked dirt, watching a legend breathe unevenly through the final pages of his story, she knew one thing with absolute clarity. They would not let him die alone. The decision sat between them like a living thing, heavy, breathing, impossible to ignore. Tao's broken body lay only a few feet away, each labored breath sounding louder now against the crushing silence. Elena and Musa crouched nearby, torn between two brutal truths. Helping him could mean risking their own lives, but leaving him meant certain death. Neither option felt survivable. Musa shifted uneasily, his hands resting on his knees. His voice, when it finally broke the silence, was strained. "We don't even know if he can survive the night." Elena didn't answer right away. She kept her eyes on Tao, studying every twitch of his battered frame. If they approached too fast, if they touched the wrong wound, if they startled him, even half dead, Tao could kill with a single swipe. Lions didn't reason when pain stripped them raw. They reacted, and no amount of good intentions would stop instinct. "We leave him here," Musa continued, softer now. "We follow protocol." "It's not wrong." Elena heard the unspoken words underneath. "We keep ourselves safe. We let nature take its course. We live." But she couldn't force her gaze away from Tao. This wasn't nature's course. This was sabotage. This was a king dragged down not by the law of the wild, but by human greed, poison, traps, betrayal. And somehow, crawling through every ounce of that, Tao had made it here, to them. It would be so easy to do nothing, to sit back, to justify it with rules, with safety. But Elena couldn't accept that. Not after seeing the way Tao had fought for every breath, every inch of survival. Not after witnessing the silent plea buried in the lion's broken eyes. She shook her head. "He didn't come all this way for us to give up on him now." Musa cursed under his breath, but he didn't argue. He pulled out the slim first aid kit, his hands shaking slightly as he unzipped it. They had supplies meant for small emergencies, stitching a wound, stabilizing minor injuries, not saving a 300-pound wounded lion. They were improvising against death itself. Elena moved first, inching closer to Tao's side, every movement slow and deliberate. She spoke softly under her breath, not words meant for understanding, but to fill the crushing silence. She needed Tao to know she was coming. She needed herself to believe he would let her. Tao's ear twitched. His eyes, half closed, followed her. But he didn't rise. He didn't bare his teeth. He didn't lash out. Permission or surrender. It didn't matter. It was enough. Musa worked fast beside her, handing gauze and antiseptics, rigging a saline line from their emergency kit. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough, but it was all they had. They poured antibiotics into the worst of the wounds, cleaned the infection as best they could, whispering encouragement they knew Tao couldn't understand. Or maybe, on some deeper level, he could. The radio crackled again. Backup was still hours away. They had chosen the dangerous path. They knew it. Any wrong movement could wake the predator inside Tao's battered body. If he panicked, they might not have time to react. But still, they stayed. Still, they worked. Because leaving him wasn't a choice they could live with. Because even broken kings deserved someone willing to bleed for them. Because sometimes survival wasn't just about saving yourself. Sometimes it was about refusing to let the world teach you to look away. Musa worked with mechanical focus, his hands stained with blood and antiseptic, while Elena kept her gaze locked on Tao's labored breathing. Minutes blurred. Every breath Tao took felt like a tiny battle won, but the victory was fragile, slipping through their fingers as fast as they grasped it. Musa's hand brushed Tao's side while applying pressure to one of the deeper wounds. He froze. "Elena, look at this." Elena leaned closer, frowning. Buried under the matted fur near Tao's shoulder was a small, rigid object. Musa worked it free carefully, wiping the dirt and blood away until the shape became clear. A tracking chip, but not like the ones issued by Masimba Reserve. This was older, heavier, marked with a faint logo neither of them recognized. A sick feeling settled in Elena's chest. She had seen similar designs in case studies, private organizations that bred lions not for conservation but for exploitation. Canned hunting farms, black market genetics labs, breeding programs where animals were manufactured, cataloged, and sold like livestock. Musa found another scar, lower near the ribs, a line too clean, too purposeful to be the work of claws or tusks. Another silent mark of a life lived in captivity once, a life shaped by invisible hands long before Tao ever roamed free. The realization hit them both at once. Tao hadn't simply been a wild lion injured by chance. He was a survivor of something much darker, ripped from the cycle of the wild, forced into a system designed to profit from his strength, his bloodline, his very existence. Somehow, against all odds, he had escaped whatever prison had once claimed him. But the world hadn't let him go easily. It had followed him, hunted him, tried again to break him when he dared to live as more than property. The wounds that littered his body told the story, not just of rogue lions or savage fights, but of betrayal stitched deep into his very bones. Musa sat back heavily on his heels, staring at the chip in his hand. "He was never supposed to survive," he said, voice hollow. Elena didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat closed up around the horror of it. All this time, they had thought Tao was just another victim of poachers, another casualty of greed. But the truth was worse. His entire life had been a stolen thing, and even his final steps had been a rebellion against it. Saving Tao wasn't just about preserving one lion anymore. It was about exposing everything he represented. Every lie, every silent cruelty hidden behind polished brochures and fake conservation promises. They worked faster now, hands steadier with the fuel of anger burning beneath their fear. Tao's breathing stuttered but did not stop. He endured their clumsy efforts without a growl, without a move to strike. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was trust. Maybe it was simply the last act of a creature who had already given everything but refused to fall alone. Elena set the blood-stained chip carefully beside her pack, a silent promise growing in her mind. If Tao survived, she would not let his story end in whispers. She would tear the lies into the open. She would make sure the world knew who he was and what had been done to him. No king should have to fight battles no one ever knew existed. No survivor should be left to die quietly in the dirt, their story buried alongside them. Tao had crawled for miles, not just seeking help. He had crawled to leave behind the truth no one wanted to see. And now, because of him, they could no longer look away. Tao's body trembled under Elena's hands, each breath a fragile, faltering thread barely tying him to life. The saline drip Musa had rigged slowed again, and the shallow rise and fall of Tao's chest warned them both. Time was slipping away. They had done everything they could with what little they had. Now it was up to Tao's battered body to hold on until help arrived. The minutes stretched into agonizing stillness. Every sound, the weak rasp of Tao's breathing, the static crackle of the failing radio, the frantic whispered prayers that neither Musa nor Elena would admit to saying, echoed louder in their ears. Then, a rumble of engines in the distance. Backup. Elena stood so fast she stumbled. Relief flooded through her so sharply it made her dizzy. Tao wasn't alone anymore. Professionals were coming. Real help. But as the first rescue team truck skidded into view, Elena's heart sank. The lead vet jumped out, barking orders before even reaching them. She caught only fragments. Risk management, no guarantees. Safest course. Humane decision. The word that hit her hardest was euthanize. They didn't see the lion who had crawled for miles against death itself. They saw a liability. A wild animal too broken to save, too dangerous to justify risking further lives or resources. Elena stood frozen as the team approached with heavy syringes prepared. Words like protocol and standard procedure thrown around like armor against guilt. Musa grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. "If we don't stop them," he said, voice low and urgent, "they'll put him down right here." Tao's eyes fluttered open weakly, meeting hers with the same tired defiance he had shown since the moment he arrived. He didn't understand the arguments flying over his head. He didn't know the policies or debates, he just knew he wasn't finished yet. Without thinking, Elena stepped between the vet and Tao, spreading her arms wide. Musa moved in beside her. They didn't shout. They didn't argue. They simply stood. Two stubborn, terrified humans refusing to let this story end in betrayal. Tension crackled. Orders were barked. The rescue team leader's face darkened with frustration, torn between procedure and the sudden, undeniable image of two people willing to risk everything for a dying lion. In the end, it bought them time, 1 hour, one impossible hour to stabilize him, or the decision would be taken out of their hands. They worked like people possessed. Every second mattered. Every heartbeat was a coin flipped between life and death. Saline pushed faster into Tao's veins. Antibiotics dosed higher. Wounds flushed and bound again. Musa kept Tao's breathing steady, adjusting his body carefully when he faltered. Elena whispered non-stop under her breath. Words meant more for herself than for Tao, but somehow they seemed to fill the air with stubborn hope. Tao's body fought them every step of the way. He seized once, a violent shudder that nearly knocked Elena back. His pulse skittered, dropped, returned. It was a battle none of them could control. All they could do was fight alongside him, as helpless, desperate allies against a darkness that refused to loosen its grip. At the edge of the hour, when the team leader stepped forward again, syringe still ready, Tao stirred. It was small, barely more than a twitch, but it was enough. His massive paw shifted, claws digging faintly into the earth. His head, heavy as stone, lifted half an inch from the ground before sagging back down. It wasn't victory, it wasn't even recovery, but it was life, still burning, still fighting. Elena straightened, planting herself firmly between Tao and the team again, her voice shaking but clear. "He's not done, you see that, he's not done." For a long moment no one moved. Then, finally, grim and reluctant, the vet lowered the syringe. Tao had won himself another chance. Not a promise of survival, not a guarantee, but a chance, the one thing he had fought every crawling, agonizing mile to find. Tao did not rise with a roar or charge back into the wild as the days passed. His recovery was slow, painful, and incomplete. Some wounds would never fully heal. His strength, once a force that could scatter rivals with a glance, never fully returned. The king who had crawled for miles was not the same lion who once ruled the plains. But he was alive. That was victory enough. Elena stayed with him through the long, brutal recovery. She fed him by hand when he was too weak to lift his head. She cleaned his wounds, whispered encouragement during the dark hours when his breathing hitched and faltered. Musa fought to convince the reserve to let Tao live out his life under protection, arguing against every recommendation to end his suffering. Tao, as if fueled by the stubborn defiance that had carried him across the plains, refused to surrender. In time, he found a strange kind of peace. He could no longer return to the wild. His injuries ran too deep, his stamina too thin. But the reserve built a large protected area, not a cage, not a showplace, but a quiet expanse where he could move freely, with dignity under the open sky. A place earned not by mercy, but by battle. Tao became more than a lion to those who knew his story. He became a symbol, a living testament to what it meant to fight for life when the world seemed determined to take it away. His survival drew attention beyond the reserve. Reporters came, but Elena refused most interviews. It wasn't about making Tao a spectacle. It was about making sure no one forgot why he had to crawl for miles just to find help in the first place. The hidden programs that had once marked lions like him were exposed. Investigations were launched. Sanctuaries grew stricter. Real protections were strengthened, and the quiet corruption buried deep in wildlife conservation was dragged into the light. Tao's suffering had started a war much bigger than himself, and finally, there were people willing to fight it. Visitors came from far away just to catch a glimpse of the lion who had refused to die. But Tao didn't seem to care for the crowds. He spent his days stretched in the sun, eyes half closed, still carrying himself with the faded majesty of a king who knew exactly what he had overcome. Sometimes Elena would sit near him, scribbling notes in a worn journal, and Tao would open one eye, regarding her with the same steady, silent gaze he had given her the day they met, the day he collapsed at the edge of her world and asked, without words, for one last chance. She never forgot what he had taught her, that survival is not always about strength. Sometimes survival is choosing to fight even when everything is broken, even when no one is watching. Tao's legend grew, but to Elena the truth was simpler, heavier, and more sacred. He had crawled across miles not just to live. He had crawled because some lives are too powerful to fade quietly, because some battles are worth fighting even when the world has already decided you've lost. Tao did not need to roar anymore to be remembered. His survival spoke louder than any sound ever could.